Ladies and gentlemen, this is Verity Seeker, and I'm your host, Mark Powles, and we have Fred Gardner, candidate for Kansas House of Representatives for District 9. And Fred, it's good to have you here on Verity Seeker today, and we have a lot to talk about. And so I'm going to ask you first, can you tell us about your family and where you live and what your occupation is? Just give us the backstory about Dr. Fred Gardner.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark. It's good to be with you today, and I am a candidate for the People's Representative for the state of Kansas from District 9. I live in Garnett. I'm a veterinarian by trade. I have had a license to practice veterinary medicine since 1978, a few years ago.
Yeah.
I've been involved in practice of veterinary medicine in Garnett since 1984. Prior to that time, I had worked in a private veterinary practice out by Dodge City at Offerly, Kansas. And I did 2 years of work in a Christian development agency in Bangladesh, doing integrated rural development, working primarily with cattle, goats, and chickens, and public health issues. We dealt a lot with foot and mouth disease, anthrax, Newcastle's disease in chickens, and so I had a great experience at that. But when I came home, Jackie and I got married, and we worked a year and a half at Offerly, and then we wanted to move back to eastern Kansas, where my family lived. And we wanted our children to grow up near family, so we bought a veterinary business in Garnett, and that's where our residence has been since that time. I have, Jackie is my wife, and we have 4 sons that are all grown now. They grew up in Garnett, and I've now sold my financial interest in the Countryside Veterinary Clinic. I still do some limited work there, but I've kind of reached another stage in life where I think it's I'm putting myself forward as a candidate to be the people's representative in Topeka from District 9, and so that's will be decided November the 8th when the election comes.
Okay. So when you speak of District 9, you're talking about, does it encompass Anderson County and straight south through Allen County? Is that pretty much it? Or
Yes, the District 9 has changed. We were in District 5 here in Garnett until April, when the redistricting was finalized. But the new District 9 encompasses Allen County, Anderson County, 3 voting precincts on the south side of Miami County, and 1 voting precinct in Lynn County around Parker.
Why do you want to do this, Fred?
Well, there are several reasons for wanting to do this. The most overriding reason is that I have grandchildren, and Jackie and I have benefited greatly through our life from the governing system that we have, and it's provided us a good life and a lot of good opportunities in business, and we want to pass on to our grandchildren as functional a governing system as we can. And the system we have is a system run by the people, we the people, as the way the Kansas Constitution starts and the U.S. Constitution as well. And so we have a governing system that is established by the people and the people's representatives. And so I'm at a stage in life when I can do that now, and I have the time and I'm able to allocate the time to do that. So I want to leave a system for my grandchildren to do that, and it's a time of giving back, if you may. You know, I've benefited greatly from good governance, and I want to contribute my part to making sure that goes forward in as an effective and helpful manner as it can for the people.
As a House representative in the state of Kansas, in your mind, what should be the proper relationship between you, the legislature, in the state of Kansas with this U.S. general government over here, this federal government that has expanded way outside its constitutional jurisdiction? What is the proper role? Do the states have more power, or does this U.S. general government have the most power and they can delegate to the states what they want? How's that supposed to work?
Well, we can have any kind of a discussion about that, and that enters into a lot of opinion as well as, but my perspective is this: the United States government is established by we the people, and we established a constitution which is the guiding document for governance of we the people. And it's not very difficult to understand. I have a copy of it here, and it's, I can read this. I can understand it. I have read that many times, and I do understand it. But that document's written primarily to outline the responsibilities and the limitations of the federal government. And at the end of that document, it says everything else is left to the states and to the people. Mm-hmm. And I can read that for you. It's right in there. But so the states have a lot of responsibility for the governance of the people. And the states also have the authority to leave that governance to the people, to self-govern themselves. And so that's a little bit idealistic. Realistically, the United States federal government is quite large and intrusive in the lives of the people. I don't particularly agree with that, but I'm not really in a position as a elected state representative to make a lot of change in that. I think we the people, if we want to change the federal government, need to elect people to Congress to represent us, and senators and the president that want to move in that direction. I'm involved in a race for state government and how we run state government, and so the relation between the two isn't exactly what I would like it to be, but I think I'm in a position where I have to accept what the federal government is, the reality of it, and the state government's not what I would like it to be, but I must accept the way it is and find ways to move it forward in a manner that more closely aligns with what is written in the Constitution of the state of Kansas and what the people want.
Okay, I'm going back to 2020, 2021. Okay, we all know what happened in 2020. We got all sorts of mandates out of this. Say you're in the legislative body as a House representative for District 9. At what point do you, as a state government, nullify mandates, executive orders, resolutions, and so on and so forth coming out of the U.S. general government that we know are not pursuant to the U.S. Constitution and actually violate the Kansas Constitution. Do you nullify those at a state and just say, I'm sorry, those are void because they're not pursuant? Do you do that? Or do you go along with the mandates?
Well, your gut reaction is that, we're going to push back against that. But I think in reality, we have to work within this, in practical terms, we have to work within the system that exists and the way things really are. And I'm quite willing to push back against what I consider U.S. federal government overreach into areas that the state government should be responsible for, and by the Constitution and the way I clearly read it, and it's not complicated. The Kansas Constitution is,
it's pretty straightforward too.
It's really straightforward document, and the U.S. Constitution, there they are. And so I think in practical terms, we've got to realize that it takes a majority of the people elected to the House of Representatives to mount any successful pushback against the mandates coming down from the federal government. I think my emphasis in government is more towards running state government efficiently rather than trying to reform the federal government. And, the events that took place in 20 and 21 up into 22, I don't really wish to drive forward with a rear view mirror. We can learn from them, but and I think my position is one thing that we did that I learned, and I think we all should learn, is that we need to trust our local health officials to deal with health issues, and the people that buy their groceries at the same store I do and whose kids go to the same school mine went to are the people I trust in when we've got a health crisis. And so I think that turning health decisions into political decisions is not an efficient way to govern the people. I'm a strong proponent of self-government. I think that we as the people, that's the way our country was founded, and that's the way we prospered, by people who make good decisions for themselves, their family, their community, their neighbors, and we solve our problems in that way. And county government, state government, federal government are all limited and have their purposes and their functions, but are not the solution for our problems.
So there really is no one size fits all. It really needs to be a bottom up approach to governance, right?
That's true. And that's the way our election system is set up, so that we can express our opinions and elect the people who clearly represent us. And that's the situation I'm in. I'm putting myself forward as one that, as a candidate to be elected to represent the people. And I trust the people in the 9th District. I think they're good self-governing people. They work hard. They know how to solve their problems, spend their money. I don't think we need a stronger, more intrusive state government to tell them how to live their lives.
Yeah. The U.S. Supreme Court basically had to tell us after 40 plus years that they really can't, rule over the internal affairs of the state of Kansas by doing away with the Roe v. Wade decision. which kind of goes along with what you're saying. It's really a state issue, isn't it?
It is.
And so when I thought about that 2019 Kansas Supreme Court decision, I realized in my mind they didn't have that authority in the first place. It's not enumerated. It's really always been up to the legislature, which is a body that you're going to enter into. What are your feelings on those 2015 statutes that were written? I mean, they're very thorough and very extensive on protecting life. Do those go away just because the 2019 Kansas Supreme Court says so, or do you feel like the legislative body has the authority to say, no, I'm sorry, we're doing this, and this is pursuant to, the Declaration 1 of our Constitution, which does protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Well, as a legislator, what would your position be on that?
Well, that whole issue of life, there are two sides to that coin, or that issue. What is reality of what's going on and the way things are being interpreted by people, and what I think was intended by the law and the way things should be done. And as you mentioned, this 2019 ruling by the Kansas Supreme Court, I do not agree with. I think that the Constitution is very clear that is something that is left to the states and to the people. And but that ruling stands. Now, if the people want to deal with that, the Supreme Court justices of Kansas are appointed, but they're also voted on by the people. Mm-hmm. And the people have the power and the authority to have them removed if they do not rule, in the people's opinion, appropriately as their authority is outlined by the Constitution. It's right there in the Constitution. And so the best way to deal with that is if the people would vote to either retain or dismiss the judges that don't agree with the people. Now, the legislature does have the authority and the responsibility to make rules governing issues such as abortion, and they should, and those laws are still on the books and they're still in place. How the judiciary is going to deal with that in the future, I don't know. That's not part of my job as a legislator. But, myself, I am pro-life, and I think it's very clear to me when life does begin, and I've dealt with that in my business for many years. It was animal life, not human life, but there are still some very close similarities, and I think the vulnerable among us, older people, people who have mental and physical challenges, and the unborn need the protection. They are granted that protection by the Constitution of Kansas. And so I will defend their right to life. I will defend their afford their protections. And so that's a very difficult question with a lot of different facets about that. But let's just conclude that I am pro-life, and I don't think the Supreme Court of Kansas has any authority over those laws that were established by the legislature.
Yeah. In the past, the legislature has said, okay, we're going to appropriate this amount of money to fund our schools. Okay. The judicial branch and their many lawyers or attorneys, they go in there and they say, I'm sorry, that's not pursuant to our Constitution. You got to give more money. And it exponentially grows. It gets more and more. And I taught in the public school. Mm-hmm. My wife still teaches in the public school. My daughter's considering being a teacher. She's substituting right now. But we, as a family, we understand that there are specific things enumerated in the Kansas Constitution that does not include some very specific extracurricular, non-educational activities that we are funding on a regular basis. And the funding for those activities are enormous in comparison to the actual educational academia in our public schools that we are constitutionally supposed to fund. Do the legislature have the constitutional authority to fund these non-education activities? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And like I said, you can avoid answering this question because I know there are people out there that just love these things, but my personal opinion is that they're not supposed to be funded constitutionally, and that if the parents want their children to participate in these non-education activities, then they should pay a fee as participant fees. And that way, the elderly who are on fixed incomes or homeschoolers, they don't have to fund all that. And I think our property taxes would probably be reduced a lot because we're not having to fund all this stuff. It's funded by people who are participating in it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's very broad, and it gets back to what's ideal and what's real. I think ideally, when we look at the statutes in the Kansas Constitution about education, they're very simple and very clear and very to the point that it's an academic training institution, and it's to be provided for the people. And they don't use the word academic. I think it was, I could look it up very quickly here, but it said scientific and instructional
and vocational.
I think were the three words that were used in the Kansas Constitution. Those are pretty easy words to understand. There's not a lot of ambiguity. It's not very ambiguous there. And so when you look at that compared to what we have now for our Kansas educational system, you think, wow, how did we get there? And we got there by we the people electing people who established this system that we have. And so, and that's practical, it's there. And so changing that from my perspective, and I think it does need some changes, we have to take the will of the people and the Constitution and make changes to the educational system. I think most specifically you're hinting at the amount of money spent for athletic events, or as I was on the board, they were all co-curricular activities.
Right. It's in the language that they get by with it.
And so, but on a practical basis, a large percentage of the people like the local football team, and basketball team, and volleyball team, and
right.
and my children participated in those. Yep. They didn't participate in volleyball, but they did football and basketball and track and other events as well. The school plays and the musical and other co-curricular activities. So what do we do and how do we go forward? When I was on the school board for 8 years, one of my goals was to try and figure out how much of our budget goes to academic training of students and how much of our budget goes to administrative purposes, what percent of our budget goes to co-curricular activities or athletic events. And it was not possible. I finally concluded it was not possible with the way our budgets are written to even get close to a reasonable percentage of those different categories, because our budgets are not written that way. And, for instance, salaries of coaches is they get an additional amount for coaching, but they are hired as a coach, and the majority of their salary goes to pay for coaching responsibilities and school buses and transportation, to haul students, but they also haul athletes and, we have to mow the grass. Well, we have to mow the grass on the football field and the baseball field also. And so the way things are established, you cannot, in my opinion, look at a school budget and tell how much is being spent for co-curricular activities. And I'm not anxious to try and tackle that problem unless there is some direction from the people that they want to address that problem. It is no secret that that costs a lot of money, and that means that our property taxes go up, and we have to pay more tax for that because there's no secret funder of those things. It's funded through taxation. And so I would be quite willing to change the way that's budgeted. I would be quite willing to change the percent of budgets that are spent for that or limit the amount of budgeting spent for that. But I'm not going to initiate a lot of activity in that direction unless people direct me to do that. I don't sense that we have a majority of the people that are really anxious to deal with that issue. And so I'm not anxious to really put a lot of time and effort in that, but I would be quite willing to look at that issue. And I'm glad you brought it up because, we can howl all we want to about our property taxes, but we've also got to look at what that is spent for and be willing to, if we want to pay less tax, we have to be willing to accept the cuts that are brought about by less taxation.
Okay. Now let's jump over to something else, and I know you're going to get hit as a legislator in the state of Kansas. There's a movement. There's a group out there called the Convention of States, the COS, and they have, I don't know how many states they have on board. They want to have a convention, and there's really different types of procedures that can be followed. It can be initiated through the legislature, the states, or it can be done through Congress in the U.S. general government to amend the U.S. Constitution. What's your feeling on that as a legislature? Because you're going to be approached. Is it too dangerous, or do you think it's safe, in your opinion, to have a convention?
Well, a convention basically opens the Constitution. And once the Constitution is open, it's very difficult to limit that to just a specific topic or a specific item. I think when you look practically at what's gone on in Washington with the U.S. Constitution and the ways we've figured to get around what's clearly written there, I don't have very much trust in opening the Constitution and trusting them to rewrite the Constitution in a manner that's acceptable to me. So I'm in favor of leaving the Constitution in place the way it's written, and I'm very cautious about opening the U.S. Constitution because even though, in my opinion, there are a lot of the intent of the U.S. Constitution, which is, it's a fairly small document and it's very clear. I don't, as much as I would like to see some of the things that these people promoting the Convention of the States, I think there are other ways to accomplish that. The most notably is, through our election of people to represent us. There's a big push to open the Constitution, to write an amendment, to limit the terms of congressmen and senators. But we, the people, have that power within our hands right today. Within 6 years, we can completely change the people that represent us in Washington, if we will. And so I'm not a big fan of constitutional convention to write as a means of amending the Constitution. I'll be reluctant to support that movement.
Yeah. In the state government, is there anything about the way it operates and so forth that you would like to change? I mean, let's say I'm not saying that you as one legislator can go in there and be a dictator, but if you could go in there and actually make a difference and you could get the support of other legislators, what in that government would you change or improve upon? I know it's broad. That's a broad question.
That's a very broad question, but I can give you a good broad answer to that. I think that the most important thing is for the people to engage and understand the issues before us and elect people that will represent them clearly and fairly. And the ones that they don't agree with, then they should remove by the vote. And I have some questions about having Supreme Court justices that are appointed, and I realize that they can be removed by a vote of the people. And so I'm not completely unhappy with that. But in recent years, we've seen the Supreme Court, get very involved in issues that that are clearly powers given to the legislature. And I can't find anything in the Kansas Constitution that gives responsibility to the Supreme Court to dictate the amount of money that the taxpayers of Kansas must pay for education. And so I think that needs to be looked at. I'm not sure we've got any good proposals on the table of how to change that. I think the clear path forward is for the people of Kansas to be acquainted with who is on the Supreme Court and how they rule, and those that they don't agree with, vote to not retain them. I think so that's one area of government that I think needs reform, and we the people can reform that ourselves without any changes. I think the other thing that needs to be looked at, and we need to look for ways to change, is the different departments that are appointed by the governor bring about a lot of the day-to-day governance or of our local community. And those different arms of government write their own rules. They enforce their own rules, and they set the penalties for those who are in violation of those rules. It doesn't appear in any manner that the U.S. Constitution or the Constitution of the state of Kansas intended for government to be run that way. And so in the state of Kansas, we need to look carefully how can we deal with that problem. And you know, we feel that in our local community. Whether you're running a veterinary business or a hardware store or a grocery store or a coffee shop, you are regulated by state agencies, and that promulgate the rules, enforce the rules, and fine you if you are found in violation of their rules. And I don't have any proposals on the table at this time, but it's definitely on my radar screen that we need to deal with that in state, and the legislature would be the appropriate place to do that.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. The hoops that, you know, kind of like you in the veterinary industry, the hoops you have to jump through just to get licensing for everything. And earlier when we talked, you talked about a local hardware store and the things that they have to be licensed for. You're saying that it deters people or it destroys businesses. It's putting people out of business that should be actually reaping the benefits of their labor and their product, but the regulations are killing them.
That's true, and it reaches into nearly every aspect of life, including the teaching profession. And I'm very much an advocate of public education. We need a good, strong public education system. It's served me well. It's served my children well. And I would hope that it will serve my grandchildren well also. The things that I don't care much for in the education system are not things brought about by local teachers or brought about by local administrators or local school boards. You know, I don't see it coming in, you know, this, for instance, critical race theory was not originated on the main streets of Gardner.
No.
I have not seen any evidence that that's true. That comes down from higher levels at the federal level and down through our state and down to our local schools. And I think it's another example of why we need to have local control of our educational system. We need to have local control of our veterinary business, the hardware store, the barber shop. You know, if that barber is doing a really bad job and giving everybody head lice, we'll know not to go there for a haircut. We don't need the state coming in here and wagging their finger at the barber. Yeah. If the hardware man is cheating me every time I buy some propane or a sack of bolts, you can't keep that secret in the 9th District. No. They'll just not go there to do any business. And so we've got to, and if the veterinarian's just ripping you high and wide and doesn't take care of your animal and doesn't do a good job, why, you don't have to go back to him again. You don't, you know, the word spreads quickly. And so we have a really good self-governing system in the 9th District. We don't need, and including education and business, and so I'm in favor of leaving that system in place. And back to the school thing, I would like to see local control and decision about our curriculum and the way the money's spent, and less influence from the state and the federal government.
Fred, this is an off-the-wall question, and we've never discussed this. What is your opinion, especially as a legislator in the state of Kansas, should teachers' unions be controlling our schools the way they do?
Oh, wow. Boy, you're asking me to put my head right on the block here.
I know.
When you go to talking about unions, and the teachers' union is huge.
And I do appreciate you coming on.
Highly influential. But, I think one of the things that really drives the strength of the teachers' union is liability. And that's true in other professions besides just the teaching profession. And, if that's the main driver, then maybe we should be dealing with liability and the necessity for insurance for teachers. And so the reality is we have a very large and a very strong teachers union, and we need to move forward with that in place. We can't just decide it's not going to exist, because it does exist. But we need to come up with plans to get our children and our grandchildren educated in an effective manner. And I think that if we had stronger local control and we put more responsibility back into the hands of teachers and less liability into the hands of teachers, we'd have a much stronger system. And we wouldn't have to rely so much on a teachers' union to hold the system accountable. And so I'm not ready to try to abolish the teachers' union, but I would like to come up with plans to protect teachers from the liability involved with that profession. And I would like to come up with ways to empower them to teach. We had a lot. The majority of our teachers when I was on the board were great people and great instructors. And I think with less administrative oversight and less state and federal directives coming down upon them, they would have done a far greater job than they did. And so while I'm not a big fan of unions, I'll make no bones about it. I'm not a big supporter of unions. They do have their place, and they come about because of what we the people do and allow, and we've allowed a lot of liability to come down on teachers, and that's really strengthened the unions. Mm-hmm. And we've also not done a very equitable job of financially rewarding those really great teachers. And so that has brought about collective bargaining for teaching contracts. And so we've got the power within our hands to deal with those problems. We don't have to have a union forcing us to that. And so I think the union would take care of itself if we, the people, stepped up and put in a stronger system for local control of our schools and the education of our kids.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. What are the main differences between you, Fred Gardner, and your opponent out there? And why is Fred Gardner the better qualified for Kansas House of Representatives District 9?
Okay. Um, I think there are some distinct differences between us as candidates, and there are some reasons why I think I would be a preferred representative of the people. Um, uh, I don't know personally Alana Cloutier, who is the Democrat that is running for the 9th District House of Representatives. But I have read um, her her statements and her positions on public media, um, and I have talked to numerous people who have had personal acquaintance in dealing with her. I think I think she's an honorable person and a good person, but and certainly has been involved in a project down there in Humboldt that's really been received a lot of national attention, and I applaud that. You know, we need to advance our rural communities. But I think when you look at her solutions to the problems that face us as residents of the 9th District, we take a very different approach. She appears to want to look to the state government to solve our problems and concentrate more power and authority from the state and allocation of money from the state to deal with our problems. I, on the other hand, would like to limit the amount of state government and the amount of control state government has, and look more towards self-government and local government, our county government, our township government, our city government, to solve our problems rather than the state or the federal government. And so we are pushing in different directions when it comes to the size and scope and reach of government. And, you know, with greater amounts of central government or state government, you have more things being done for and to the people. I realize that, but with less government, state government, you have less taxation but more personal responsibility. And that's what I'm in favor of. And I think also my family moved into eastern Kansas in 1870. We've made our living in eastern Kansas since that time. My father lives in the house I grew up in. It's the house his grandfather built. He was born in the house. He still lives there. And so, you know, we've been long-term business people in eastern Kansas for a long time. And I've benefited a lot from that. So I know a lot of how the people in eastern Kansas, particularly the 9th District, think and feel. I've done business with a lot of people since 1984 that reside in the 9th District. I think Alana hasn't lived here near that long, but I think she's a credible candidate, but just going in a different direction. And I think my length of tenure here and my acquaintance with a significant number of people in the district and my approach to governance are significantly different than hers. And so I think the people have a clear choice. I obviously think that the direction I want to take state government is preferred, but the direction Alana would like state government to go is not wrong, but it's definitely different than me.
Yeah, it seems to be a pattern between the two parties. I'm speaking of specifically Democrat, Republican. you sound like a true conservative in the truest sense of the word. You want smaller government and more self-accountability, self-governance. Still have to have government, but it will be limited. Whereas Democrats, those in the Democrat Party, seem to want bigger government throughout. And I don't understand that. It's almost, I call it the Communist Party. That's where it's all headed when you're talking about that particular party. Whenever you're getting into nationalizing the government or you're wanting to expand the power and scope of government over the people, that's what you always end up with.
Yeah, it's a different approach to government than what I'm in favor of. You know, when I look back over the last, since 1870, the things that have been opportunities for my family and my family members, as we increase the size and scope and reach of state government, it hasn't been beneficial to the members of my family and my community and my town. And we moved here specifically to come back to this, and we were not disappointed. This was a great place to raise our family, close to other family members and extended family, and with neighbors and friends, and it's a very good environment, and we wanted that very much, and I want that to continue. And I think as we get more and more state involvement in local lives and affairs, that is less and less possible. And it's certainly been that way in my family. And I pledged to push back against that rather than expand that. But that's a clear choice. The people will decide on November the 8th. If they want more central government, I'm not a good candidate. If they want less or to contain state government, I'm a clear choice for that.
Okay. In the original ordinance of the Kansas Constitution, it says that land will be taxed. And, of course, you know that farmers who use their land for agri-use commercial property, they're taxed at 33% of the mill. If you're a business owner and you have a business use, commercial use building, it's taxed at 25% of the mill. And your home, your private home, which you built or purchased, is 11.5% of the mill. And that's all used to support various aspects of state and local government. Okay. But the original ordinance says land. I think it's Article 11, deals with the ways you can tax and goes through the whole procedure. In 1861, it was only about 2 paragraphs long because it dealt with a very limited way to tax people. Now, it's like column after column of different ways that you can tax people, especially on their private property and their real property. That's your property. Is the taxation of your home and your business use property and your farming equipment and so on or whatever, is that legalized theft? And if it is, how would you phase out the taxation of your personal and real property and get that back to the original ordinance and make it even across the board instead of picking and choosing how? That's another big question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a rather large question, but there's some easy answers. And you can, obviously the taxation system that we have today that's real, we all know it's real, we all have to pay our taxes, is much different than it was in the early days of our statehood. And my family has experienced the same thing. When you look backwards, when my great-great-grandfather and my great-grandfather were immigrated here in 1870 and 1880, they owned some land. They produced, and they had men working for them that had children that needed educated, and it seemed like a fair and reasonable thing to tax the landowners to build the schoolhouse. And there was land allocated. In fact, one of the pieces of land my great-grandfather owned he bought. It was school land, and the money went to build the schoolhouse where my dad went to school. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother was on the school board there. My dad was on the school board there. And, that system of taxing land to run the government and to run the school system seemed like a pretty good and a pretty fair system. And it worked pretty good. Well, now we move forward to the day and age we live in now in 2022. We've got a huge government with a lot of aspects about it that requires a lot of money. And if we try to go back to just taxing the land, and we can, but there again, it's the will of the people. We, the people, have to elect people, represent us, that will move us back to that. That can't happen in a day, a week, or a month, or a year, but we can move in that direction. But we, the people, must be willing to ask for that and elect representatives that will do that. We must also be willing to, if we want to pay less taxation on all of our property, we have to be willing to live with the size and structure of government that less taxation supports. And we have to look also at the consequences of moving in that direction. If, the largest segment of the Kansas economy is agriculture. Between agriculture, oil and gas, and aviation, they are the three pillars that hold up the Kansas economy. And so if we were to move taxation, if we could, and we can't, one person definitely can't, to strictly taxing the land, that would cause a huge eruption in production agriculture, and that would have a ripple effect that would affect every person in the state. And so, first of all, we can't go back to just taxing land, and second of all, we don't want to do that immediately. If we want to go back to that, then we've got to come up with ways to fund the things that are going on now or do away with them when it comes to government. And I will say this, I think whenever you try to shrink central government, whether it's at the city level, county level, state level, or federal level, whenever you try to cut, it really brings down a firestorm of problems and resistance. So the question about all of our personal property being taxed to death, I agree. I'm a recipient of those taxes as well. I pay those taxes. I don't like that tax system. I pledge to push back against all of the taxation in all of its different forms that come down upon us, because it's crushing. It's one of the things crushing the lifestyle and the life that we've enjoyed in rural Kansas, which is District 9. and it's changing us in a direction I don't like. But I don't see a huge tax revolt coming anytime soon. I think, practically speaking, we can push back against that, but if we want major reduction in any of our taxes, we have to be willing to accept the cuts in central government that it go along with that. And so I'm willing to make cuts to central government, but I'm one of 125 representatives if I'm elected. And so on a practical basis, we need to we need to do what the people want. And if the people want less taxation and less government, I'm in there. If they want to hold the line against that, I'm in there. If they want a larger, more intrusive, more providing central government, I'm not the best choice.
Okay, fair enough. Tuesday, November 8th, 2022, like you said, that's the general election. Have our elections in the state of Kansas been fair and secure, in your opinion? I mean, there's no real way of knowing, but I know there are people out there that believe that we even have a problem here in the state of Kansas.
Well, I think we've always had, ever since the foundation of our country, had those who want to influence and rig elections. And there have been examples down through history where that has occurred. And there have been examples in Kansas where that has occurred. But do we have widespread voter fraud in Kansas? I don't see the evidence of that. I think that we do need to keep the safeguards in place that we've had for a long time, where people have to register to vote, and I personally like it when I go to vote and I walk in and somebody I recognize asks me what my name is and what my address is and show me your driver's license. Right. So that, and if I do that, they give me, I'm not offended at all by that. I think that that it is not the fastest or the easiest way to do elections, but it is very secure. There's no way I can defraud those people right there across the table from me that know who I am.
Yep.
And so I think that massive voter fraud in Kansas is I don't see the evidence that it exists. If there's evidence, I'd like to see it. But should we be aware that there are those who want to influence and swing elections? Yes, we should be aware of that. And yes, we should, as we move more and more into the digital age, which I'm a slow adopter of those things. I readily admit, all of my business life, I talk to people directly, or I use the telephone directly with them. And now things have changed a lot, and I'm trying to adjust. But as we go to more of a digital society, we need to make sure that our election process remains safe and secure and very difficult to defraud. And I trust the people in our own county that run the elections. They have always done a good job. And I don't think we have any significant fraud going on there. And I'm not opposed to changes and newer, more efficient ways of doing that, but we need to make sure it is secure, because we, the people, need to be able to express ourselves through the voting booth to elect the people that will represent us in government, whether that's on the township board or the county commission or the city commission or the 9th district representative or the governor or the president. And so we need to have secure elections. Yes, we do.
Do you think these drop boxes and early voting kind of promote cheating?
Well, absolutely they do. You know, if you have a drop box where you drop your ballot in and nobody's really watching or holding you accountable, it certainly opens the door for those who want to cheat to be involved. And so it's just pretty obvious to me that if you have a system where there's not direct accountability for the votes that are being cast, you're compromising the integrity of the election. And so just open drop boxes out on the main street of Gardner, no thank you. I don't think we need that. I don't think we need that in any city. But in the 9th district, no, I'm not in favor of drop boxes that are unmonitored or secured. I like the system we had. If we can come up with a more efficient system, okay, I'll consider that. But I think drop boxes are not a good solution.
Yeah, we've got one right on the west side of the courthouse. That's
Okay.
why I asked. I don't want to see it there. I'd like to see it go and just have people,
I'm not in favor of that.
vote. Yeah.
I think we've got to accommodate those who can't physically get up and get to the polls on the 8th, and those that for business reasons are gone or traveling or whatever. I'm not opposed to accommodating those people. Mm-hmm. I have voted early myself, and I felt that was secure. I went to the clerk's office and voted.
In person.
In person. Yeah. And so I'm not opposed to accommodating those who, for whatever reason, have difficulty going to the poll on the 8th of November. But I think we need to make sure that is a secure system.
Okay. We finally made it. We did. Do you have any last words, something that we didn't cover or a question I didn't ask that you want to tell the folks out there who will be voting for you or your opponent? What would you tell them?
Well, the only thing I would say is that I have very strong opinions and ideas about government, as we have talked about here in this interview, but I think I would like to just reinforce with the people out there that I want to be a representative of all the people. And I can and will represent all people, even those who don't agree with my position on government and the directions we'll go in government. I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to try and understand what they need and what they want. And I have done that for the last 40 years in business. I have done business with people with all kinds of political persuasions. And we've even talked politics, a lot of us. And we don't necessarily agree, but we can discuss the issues. And so I pledge to be a very open legislator who can be approached and can be talked to about issues and directions of government. And I'm very willing to consider everybody's opinion. I realize that when it gets down to it, you have to raise your hand, yes or no, on the measures that are brought before the House of Representatives, and I will quite definitely do that. But in the process of getting to that vote, I'm quite willing to listen to the people, because I represent not just those who agree with me, but all the people of the 9th District. And I pledge to do that in a fair and equitable manner.
Okay, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Fred Gardner, Preserving Our Kansas Way of Life, Kansas House District 9. Fred, thank you very much for coming in and answering all these strange, broad questions for us, okay? I think it's very important that the people out there get a chance to hear what the candidates think, and I thought you answered the questions very well, and I appreciate you doing this for us.
I'm quite glad to do that, and thank you for having me today, Mark.
You bet. Well, this is Verity Seeker. I'm your host, Mark Powles, and we're signing off.